The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind, the Tathagata. Today is the second day of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico. And I'd like to speak in more detail about practice. I've mentioned in previous times this concept of silent illumination. It's not a concept, actually. It's a description of our true nature. It also is the name for a method of meditation that is also known as shikantaza, or quote, just sitting, close quote. And that just is quite deep. It's not, oh yeah, I'm just whatever. It is nothing but total presence and awareness. It is the main teaching or the main practice of the Soto school, but I have yet to meet anybody of current Soto teachers. Of course, I haven't asked all of them about it. So there may be some out there who actually do have a true understanding of what silent illumination or shikantaza really is in practice. It is not an easy practice to reach. It takes a great deal of maturity in one's practice before one can actually do true shikantaza. But silent illumination, this is something that is not spoken of very much, other than in the pejorative. Our feisty Dharma ancestor, Hakuin, really had nothing good to say about it. He called it the cave of dead sitting. Actually, I suspect he had a misunderstanding, or else in his era, it really was a cave of dead sitting. A cave of dead sitting is when you kind of hunker down into this really nice mind state of, it can be deeply peaceful. It can be very comfortable, and you hang out there, and that's a dead end. It really is something to be concerned about if you find yourself at that type of sitting. Zazen is active. Silent illumination. Illumination is not a passive experience. Illumination is each moment being enlightened. It was first spoken of by a Chan master, Hongzhi, who was born 1091, I believe. His father actually was a Rinzai layperson. Rinzai was very big in China in those days, Rinzai school. And Hongzhi had a proper Confucian education, and at the age of 11 was given over to a temple to be ordained. Of course, when he was 18, he set about his sort of more advanced level of ordination and practice. He was a novice, ordained as a novice at 11. That's a fairly young age, but on the other hand, in those days in China, kids left home at 12 and not necessarily to join a monastery. People didn't live as long, and life was much simpler. Hongzhi is known as someone who was deeply realized. He also is known as essentially the founder of Shikantaza, the practice of Shikantaza, which he called silent illumination. And he's also the collector of the Book of Serenity, which is one of the koan collections prominent in the Soto sect. Back in those days, the Soto sect, Kaodong and Chinese, was quite almost undistinguishable from the Rinzai sect in terms of the way they worked. Rinzai is famous for his great shouts, and there were shouts in the Kaodong school practice as well. They worked on koans in the same way as Rinzai did. Nowadays, it's very different, at least in Japan. In fact, nowadays, the Japanese Soto sect really maintains more the Shikantaza focus. And I found it very interesting that many, many years ago, the San Francisco Zen Center published a newspaper, really. It looked just like a newspaper. And in it, there were, in 2 different issues, there was a sequence of essays about how they teach koans at the San Francisco Zen Center, which of course is one of the premier Soto temples in America today. And essentially it was like a college class, 2 weeks per koan, studying the history of the protagonists and so on and so forth. It's in contrast to modern Rinzai koan work, which can take a person years and years, even decades, on a single koan. These are 2 different ways of working, and they have value for certain people. Here we work on koans in the traditional Rinzai way because our purpose is to come to deep awakening and to manifest the expression of that deep awakening moment by moment in everything we do or say or think. And to that end, as I said yesterday, there's a particular set of important aspects to the practice here that help to make that possible. And when we consider the contemporary Chan master Sheng Yen and his Dharma successor Guowu, they were proponents of silent illumination as an active practice, not as sitting back and waiting for awakening to hit, which really isn't a practice at all. If you wait for awakening to hit, then there's something going on with your method of practice. But what they call silent illumination as a practice in the school of Chan that is contemporary with Sheng Yen and Guogu, silent illumination is very much like the wordless exploration that we do here. Even working on a koan, we work primarily on extending the out breath with an openness to possibility. The openness to possibility allows us to do more than just simply extend our out breath. Extending the out breath is vital in terms of a cutting edge tool to help let go extraneous involvements. Because in order to practice it properly, you cannot keep yourself thinking about things as you're extending the out breath, or you're not doing it properly. To do it properly, you breathe out, focused on your hara, open to every sense in your body. And as you get to the end of when you would ordinarily breathe back in again, then you push it further out. And you don't necessarily want to get to a point of gasping, but there's a long way it can go out before that happens. And what that requires is focus, intention, and awareness. And curiously, it results in a narrowing focus on the experience of the breath going out and the experience of the energy in the body as part of that, because you're not imagining what it feels like to breathe out. You're feeling it in every cell in your body. And at the same time, oddly enough, there's an expanded awareness, so that you're aware of things around you, but they're not your main focus. Your main focus, of course, is on reaching through the out breath. And this is an important aspect of this practice. It's not just breathing out and extending that out breath. It's also with an attitude of openness to possibility. Somebody asked me recently what that means, openness to possibility. It's as if you're standing out in a field. And in fact, I think Flora Courtois described it well. She said that you're seated in a clearing in the forest, and you know that in that forest there are animals, and some of them are potentially dangerous. And so you are sitting there, not with tension, but with heightened awareness. There's a difference. You're open to something appearing or not appearing, and you have no idea what it might or might not be. This is openness to possibility. If we have an idea about what we're looking for, it completely blots out the landscape and prevents us from seeing the forest for the trees, so to speak, so that we can experience enlightenment without recognizing it, because we've got some idea about it that is overlaying the experience and preventing us from recognizing it. And part of that overlay is all of our conditioning. Over the years since we were born, we've developed ideas about all kinds of things: ourselves, others, the world, what we like, what we don't like, whether we're for or against vaccines, and on and on and on and on. And some of our opinions are quite strong and deeply entrenched. All of this is like layers that are obscuring the treasure beneath. Quite some time ago at this point now, but in relatively recent history, in Thailand, there was an ancient monastery, and they usually have many, many Buddha figures in these monasteries. In this particular case, I think it was all standing in a row, or sitting in a row, I should say. And to the normal person, they looked like they were made out of mud or stucco. Well, it turns out there was an earthquake or something, and they began to crack open, and beneath these layers of mud were gold, solid gold statues. And that's how it is for us. our true self is pure, is beyond description, really. Silent illumination is about as good as it can be described. Luminous transparency is another description, and that one is common in the Tibetan tradition. And that gets me to sharing with you, as I have done before, the story of my brother's dying. At this point, I think 7 years ago, of cancer, suddenly, unexpected. I mean, he was in tremendous good health otherwise, quite healthy condition, other than the fact that his diet was rotten. White bread and bologna sandwiches were his favorite food. Anything green, forget it. And that's for trees, not for people. And so his diet may have led to some possibility of succumbing to cancer. We knew he had gotten cancer. It was a discrete cancer. It wasn't embedded in his bladder, but it was just there, a tumor in his bladder. And so it was decided to remove it and remove the bladder too, and create a new bladder out of part of his intestinal system. This apparently is the newest way to do things, rather than install a pig's bladder, which is the closest I understand to human flesh. But if you have your own built-in bladder in some form or another, you don't have to take autoimmune drugs or immunosuppressive drugs. So because he was in such excellent health otherwise, they ran him through two rounds of chemo ahead of the surgery. And then they did this 10.5-hour long surgery, and it was quite successful. And then he had, I think, 4 more rounds of chemo, very, very rapid succession, because he was still in such good shape. So they were pounding the cancer faster than they would have otherwise. 6 weeks after the last round, he was dead. We didn't expect that part. And I found out about it as I was driving to Denver, and pulled over and tried calling my brother, and he happened to be awake at the moment. The message I had gotten was that he had told his wife to call his sisters and let them know that he only had a few days left to live. And so I said, I won't be able to come until Monday. And he said, I'll be gone by then. And then he said, I've had a good life. I have no regrets. And I apologized for the grief I'd given him as we were growing up. I was intensely jealous of him. We were 2 years apart, but we were also very close. And he laughed. He was clearly very okay with this whole thing. His wife told me later that he very specifically did not want to be drugged as he was dying. And I know he was intensely curious about what death really meant. Early in his medical career, I heard him say, you're dead, that's the end, nothing, finished, done. But then when our dad died, our mother had dropped dead some years before, actually about 10 years before. And then our dad died, and he said, what does Buddhism say about what happens to you after you die? And I said, well, if you ask that question in your own self within long enough, you'll find the answer. Well, A year later, he says to me, "You can't find an answer." And I think, wow, Bill, you sat with that all that time. So I know he was quite curious. And as a doctor, he saw lots of death and lots of physical destruction. Down there in southwestern Virginia, people were always getting drunk and wiping themselves out on trees or various other things. And he was the one that put their faces back together, if they were put back together enough, a bowl. So I came back from Denver 2 days later, and the following morning, my sister called and said he just breathed his last. And what was amazing after that was that there was this sense of sort of a little bit of confusion and a light grief. And that lasted for about 4 hours. I've had these kinds of experiences enough that I know when it's me feeling something and when I'm picking up on somebody else's feelings. And then it morphed into, the only thing I can call it is luminous transparency. Profound, luminous transparency, nothing but. And that lasted for somewhere close to 18 hours, and then it just dissolved. So I have no doubt that my brother never quit questioning, what does it mean to die? And that as he did, he discovered his true self. As we can as well. And we don't have to wait till we are dying of bladder cancer in order to do that. Hopefully we will be really diving in every single possible moment that we can. How? The extended out breath is a very cutting edge tool when it's coupled with the openness to possibility. And as part of that whole process, what happens is people become more and more aware of, so to speak, the mud covering up the gold statue of Buddha. Except it's not a gold statue of Buddha, it's a living, breathing, silent illumination. So let me share some from a book recently written by Guogu. As I said, he was Master Sheng Yin's Dharma successor, one of them. Sheng Yin had a number of Dharma successors, actually, some of them Westerners. Guogu happens to be Chinese. The subtitle is A Chan Buddhist Path to Natural Awakening. And there's a couple of things I would like to share with you here. In practice, we need to develop an awareness of the overall tone of our internal states. By helping us to clear out the clutter in our minds, meditation exposes these hidden internal states so that we can do something about them. Is this clearing a self-awakening? No, it can be misinterpreted as such, but it's not. It is simply practice, and self-grasping may still be present. So this is what is also termed focusing in the psychological community. It's a tuning in to the sensations in one's body. And when we combine that with the extended out breath and the openness to possibility, then little by little, more and more clarity comes in terms of where we are caught and preventing ourselves from experiencing that truth of awakening. He has a little more to say about it here. Well, let's first share some words of the Chan Master Hongzhi that I mentioned earlier. Chan Master Hongzhi refers to feeling tones, which is what Grogu calls these senses, these bodily senses, as, quote, dust-like intentions, close quote, and, quote, concerns, close quote, that conceal the original bright mirror mind of natural awakening. Hongzhi teaches that we have to recognize that there is nothing outside ourselves. If we expose and loosen our grasp on these feeling tones, in other words, we feel sensations in our body. Sometimes they come up with a sense of liking or a sense of disliking, or a sense of irritation or a sense of fear. Tuning in to that, becoming familiar with them, opening to them, owning them in a sense, allowing ourselves to practice this radical acceptance. We don't have to like it, but this is how it feels right now. So, wow, how does it feel right now? Let's explore. If we expose and loosen our grasp on these feeling tones, we will not be affected by the objects of our experiencing either, because we no longer experience subject and object as separate, even when we fully engage with the world. And Hongzhi says, silent and still, abiding in itself, this suchness is apart from conditioning. Its luminosity is vast and spacious, without any dust directly. Delusion is thoroughly relinquished. Arriving at this fundamental place, you realize that it's not something newly acquired today. Though it is like this, it must be actualized. To actualize it in this moment is to simply not allow a single thing to arise, a single speck of dust to cover it. Now, here we have to be careful, because it sounds like we're trying to squash it or trying to keep it in place and prevent anything else from overriding it or taking its place. That's not what is meant. Our mind is a flow. And when we try to stop it, we launch ourselves into two dimensions instead of this wondrous three-dimensional experience of living that we otherwise have access to. So about these feeling tones, as Gogu calls them, he speaks of how to cultivate the right attitude. We can cultivate right attitude through a fourfold process of exposing, becoming aware, embracing, allowing ourselves to practice radical acceptance, transforming, and they naturally transform when we accept them fully, and letting go. And that transformation and letting go comes from that full presence with whatever sense is going on in the body. And it can be a sense perception, something we hear, and suddenly there's another thought about it, and a sense feeling around it, a sight, a memory. It doesn't matter what it is, but go beneath the conscious level of it, or the overt level of it, maybe is a better word, and tune in to the physical experience of what that energy feels like, and stay present with it until it dissolves. And you'll know that it actually is letting go if there is a sense of release, a sense of, it can also disappear, but that's just gone underground. And with good meditation practice and patience, it'll return. And then you may have a better chance of really allowing radical acceptance of it for a longer time. Having grown up with all kinds of experiences, human beings have some experiences. They're not ones that they want to feel, not ones that they want to remember. And these are the harder ones to let go of the conditioning around. But in order to reveal our true face, we have to let these things float away and reveal that true face. As long as we are intent on maintaining a self-image, which is, it involves all kinds of things like attitudes and assumptions and criticisms and judgments, and you know, at the core of that is a very strong and determined self-image based on how we perceive we've been treated and how we have reacted to that perception of having been treated. And it colors our life, unnecessarily so. So in the practice, we need to sink beneath these things, not trying to deny them. That's really, really important, not to deny them. And this is where people in the past in Zen practice have made big mistakes. And this is my argument with how some koans in some places are taught, basically as bulldozers, overriding any feelings, any sensations, any thoughts, anything else. It's not about chasing thoughts. It's about simply being aware. And being aware, so aware that we drop beneath the cloud cover, so to speak, and get closer to the original face. In this way, doing this over and over and over again. And the koan work can help make that happen. But not if it's used as a bulldozer. The openness to possibility is vital. The presence that we can reach faster through extending the out-breath is an enormous help. And in fact, there is some evidence that the Buddha himself came to awakening simply through extending the out-breath. And his puzzling over why is there such suffering? We're born, we get sick, we die, nothing more. It's interesting that in many temples in the United States, simply following the breath is taught, or counting the breath. And one of my Dharma sisters in our very first sesshin didn't realize that that's what was being taught. She thought she was supposed to extend the out breath. And she did. And she had a very deep kensho in that sesshin. It's powerful. It's amazingly powerful. You could reach a state of clarity rather fast if you really give yourself to this extended out breath with that openness to possibility, that wordless questioning, that the sense that there is something that could be revealed if you stretch hard enough, look carefully enough, reach farther, and it can. So while silent illumination was not a concept that Alcuin was particularly fond of, the way it's taught by Shengyan's lineage, which is Hongzhi's lineage, it's quite powerful. So I leave you with that information, and I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows. There's still more time left. Yeah, we still have about 15 minutes left of sesshin, or I should say of this period of sesshin. So we'll just go ahead and stop the recording and go back to Zazen after we recite the 4 vows.